Hi, welcome to Crafting with Kimberly. I'm Kimberly Canale, and we're going to make shabby chic wreaths. Back in my day, they were shabby chic. Now the new term is farmhouse. So whichever way you want to call it, farmhouse or shabby chic, this is what we're going to make. A fun, frilly little wreath or a little more structured one with flowers. So let's take a look at what supplies we're going to need for this project. You need some fabric. It really doesn't matter what type of fabric that you use, but one thing you want to be aware of is a pattern. This is an example of like an all-over pattern. So it doesn't really matter if it's going horizontally or vertically. Another example is like this tie-dye that I had used. The back side is still, you can see the pattern through the back. It's a little white on that side, and more pink on the one side, but it doesn't really matter. Whereas this fabric that I also used to show what a big pattern would look like. This is a print that has, you can see a bunch of snowmen, houses, very wintry type of fabric. Very specific motifs and very lightweight, light on the other side. So a very dark pattern on one side shows through very light on the other. You want to keep in mind what your patterns are going to look like, because when you're looking at your fabric on your wreath, you can see just the kind of the plain fabrics with just a very subtle print. Really doesn't matter one way or the other. But I found the ones with the pattern, you could really see, I don't know, I didn't like this as much. And I definitely would not be making a whole wreath with that kind of pattern, because you can see once you cut it into strips, it just looks different. Like some of them look nice cut up, and then others, there was too much white or too much of the other color on it. So it really kind of depends on what you think what you want it to look like when it's all bunched together. This is the example of what a solid color is. And I'm going to be showing you three or four different ways of how to put these on the wreath. So you need your fabric. We're going to be putting them in strips. You also need a wreath form. This particular one I used a round. You can use a square, any kind of shape, size wreath form you want. If you don't have a wreath form and you have some wire coat hangers, you can pull it to get it into shape. Then you already have your hook ready to hang on it, and you can just tie them all around. You'll only have, when you're using a wire coat hanger, you'll only have one row though. If you did want 2 or 3 rows, just take 2 or 3 coat hangers, but then cut this part off, make it smaller, and do one inside the other, and then you would have to attach them with wire. But that's a possibility as well. Another nice idea of what to use for a wreath form are the fun shapes that they sell at Dollar Tree. They come in plastic shapes for the season. Bunnies at Easter, pumpkins for Halloween, trees at Christmas. This happened to be a pineapple that they had during the summer. What I did is I left the mesh, it's kind of like a plasticky tube mesh. I left it on the top, and you can see that it's just like a plastic grid. I took it off the bottom, and then I created this wreath by using yellow strips. You get a two-toned effect just because the yellow material has a white background and like a yellow, small little yellow on the flower on the front, yellow and white. So I use those as my strips to make this wreath. Now this can be hung outside because it still has the plastic on top, so that's okay. It's made of plastic, and the cloth might get a little damaged in the weather, but this isn't precious to me, so I don't really mind. It's okay. And you could hand wash this if you needed to. So you can see on the back here with the grid, I put about 2 or 3 strips on each one, and I'll be showing how to do the strips later on in the video. But this is just a finished example of, if you didn't want to do just a straight round wreath, utilizing some of these fun shapes, then you can have a little shabby chic wreath for every season. If you're going to be doing this style, which I will be showing you as well, again, I used it on the round wreath form. If you're going to be doing the straight flowers or adding flowers to your other wreath, I suggest getting some cardboard to work on, the back of a cereal box or any other prepackaged cardboard box in your cupboard. Great tool to work with. And then what you'll do for those, just draw out the size. This was about almost 3 inches. I happen to have a glass that was about that size, and I traced it around, and then you're going to want to cut those shapes out. This one was a little bit about 2 inches, and again, the same thing. Draw it, trace it, cut it. So if you're going to be doing flowers on either of the wreaths, I suggest getting some cardboard so you can make a pattern. Makes it much easier to cut the circles out. Decorations are fun. Buttons, a lot of fun to add those in. You can see in the centers of the flowers, a button looks really pretty. With these, I put all sorts of different buttons in there, all different ones, so that's pretty to use. You could do, if you're doing this method, you could also still have the stringy effect, but then put flowers around this part of it. Or you just go with the straight shabby chic, which is where the shabby chic and the farmhouse style comes from, and get just this crazy ruffled look, which is a lot of fun. This obviously is not what the wreath looks like. This is just my example to show you the different ways that we're going to be adding these on. So again, let's turn the camera around and we'll get started. So to get started, we're going to need to make some fabric strips to be able to either tie or hook onto our wreath. When you buy fabric, if you are purchasing it off a bolt or having some remnants, you'll see that it a lot of times has the edge. This basically will tell you what the pattern is, by what designer, if it's a designer, or other information on that. And then it also has a finished edge at the end. You can see, kind of looks like a whitish, more whitish strip on that side, and then you can see completely the big strip on this side. You're definitely not going to want this to be part of your strip. Will cut that off at the end, but I want you to see sometimes fabric has a very strong grain, which is the way the fibers are laying. So if you try to rip your fabric against the grain, it makes it much more difficult to rip even strips. Going with the grain, you can rip it very easily and it'll be very uniform. If you go against the grain, it tends to start out to the size that you want and then slowly rip down thinner. So the way to find that out is, here is my edge. I'm going to come over to this part of it, and I'm going to start to try to, just with my fingernail, pick out a few strings and see how easily they come off. Can I pull that easy? That pulls very easily. going down this long way. Those let me pull nice long strings out really easy. If I were to go against the other edge, I do have to cut that to be able to get some strings so you can see. If I were to try to pick some off of that, for this particular fabric, you can see that pulled off pretty easy too. I didn't have a problem pulling those off. So with this fabric, they do pull off pretty easy. So I think I'm going to be okay to cut that in a strip. Let me try another piece here to see if I can show you the differences of the grains. With this fabric, if I try to pull some here, all right, see if I'm pulling, I don't know if you can see that clearly. See how it's not letting me really pull that very easily? It's starting to gather itself. I struggle to pull a string off this way. It's not coming easily. But if I turn it around to the other end and try to pull some strings off, this was a fresh cut, you can see that that pulls a little easier. Those come off a little bit easier. So if I was going to be ripping my strips, I would want to put a little cut in there, pull straight down. And you can see, because I went with the grain, you can see that's a pretty uniform strip that tore pretty easily. Depending on your fabric, every fabric is different, so we can't make general assumptions because every single fabric, depending on what it's made of, the thickness of the fabric, these are cottons. Cottons work great. So whatever you're using, just kind of experiment with how you want to cut your strips. But as you can see, the easiest way to do it, I make my strips about an inch. You really don't want to go much thinner and much thicker. I'm finding a little over half an inch or an inch works really well. Just give yourself a little snip in your fabric and then just start to pull. And you can see it's a lot easier than having to cut really, really, really long strips. Much easier. And then you can see on the whole, they're fairly uniform. This is probably a little bit thicker than what I would use. I would think a little thinner. I'm going to do this one in half. We'll see how that goes. Pull that in half. And then just pull down. Very relaxing to pull fabric. And then you have your fabric strips. Now, in regards to how long you want your strips, that all depends on the style of what you want to do. With this one, you can see I have just, these are all the different colors together, and they were connected. This particular wreath form had 4 bars. So with this one, I did one on each of the bars. This one, I decided to not have it be so thick, so I only used 3 of the bars. So I did one on the outside ring, I did another row, and then I did 2 rows together. So you could go 2, 4, 3, however you want to put them on to give you the thickness of what you need. For this particular style, where this is really highlighting more of the fabric, so giving a nice smooth edge, especially if you're wanting to do fabric flowers, and then having the shabby chic kind of fringe, the best way to measure for that is take one of your strips that you just made, lay it down, and say, how long do I want my strips? I probably would go even a little thinner. I need to trim this up. I really didn't like it that long. So I'm kind of thinking I would prefer it this way, but it's however long you want them to be. So take your strip, fold it in half, put it under your frame, and then take the top part and go down over and leave about a ½ inch overwards. That's going to give you enough of the fabric for this bump to be able to connect it on. So obviously that one's way too long. So now by doing that, I can just kind of pull this and say, all right, I want my strip to probably be about this long. How far do I have to go over the top to give my edge? Probably about there. So I know I can cut that right there. And then this is the size that I'm going to have for my strip. So it's almost about half of that. So that's the easiest way for your very first one to see how long do you want your strips to be. Then once you have a bunch of strips, again, we would not use that part, so don't use that in part of your measurement. You would cut that part off. From there, you can then use your one strip to go down and measure, and then you're able to cut. And then don't throw any of your scraps away. Use these for other projects, or at the very end, you can use one of your strips to make a hanger. We can do that. Or if you're going to be making flowers, you can use some of your strips as a base. So once you get a whole bunch of your strips cut, and again, depending on the size of your wreath, that depends on how many strips you're going to need. But here are 2 strips. To do this type of pattern where you're covering most of the wreath and then having it hang out, you're going to take your strip, fold it in half, place it under, so you have 2 open ends and your loop. Put your fingers through the loop, grab a hold, and pull. You can see by pulling it that way, that gives me a bump up here, but I want my fringe to be here, so I would need to flip that over. So this is where you also need to decide. You can kind of see that's a V. That looks more like a V as opposed to this one. I'm going to move this over right next to it. As opposed to this one where you can see this has a bump. You can see a little bump there. This one is more of a V. So you need to decide, what do you like? Do you like the bump on the outside? That's my preference. Or do you like it to be a V? If you want the bump on the outside, then you would do this the opposite way. Take your closed end, put that towards you, have your 2 open strips facing up. Put your fingers through, grab a hold of those strips, pull it through that loop, and pull tight. That gives me now my bump on the outside. To place a strip without having to move it around too much, take your fabric, closed loop on one end, open strands at the other, put it underneath your wreath form. Make sure your strips are basically inside out. The pattern side is showing on the back, and the back side is showing on the front. Make sure you have your loop facing up the front. When you put your fingers through, grab those two, and if you carefully pull and pull them together, you won't have to go through and flip and move things, such as this one. You can see that this one flipped, so I can easily undo the loop, fold it out, pull it back down. But if you don't want to have to fiddle and go through and fix all of those, if you put them on this way and go slowly, you shouldn't have to maneuver a lot of your loops if you really care about if they're facing the right way or if their backside is showing. If you don't want their backside to show, do it that way. And then you would go all the way around, push them together, and you would go all the way around your wreath. And then again at the end, if that's still too long or they're uneven, if it's uneven like this one is, you can loosen up the knot. If it's the size you really want, take your edges, put your edges together, loosen that knot, and then pull. That evens up your edges. You know, that's too long. I don't like that, or they're a little uneven. Yeah, I don't want to fix it. Just once you have them all on, go through, give them a snip and a trim if you want them to be smaller. So that's that particular way. The nice thing with doing it this way too is if you have, say, a piece of, I'll use that, a piece of lace, you could also lift one of the edges of each one, especially if it's lace where it would be see-through, and you can ring that through, and that would give you an extra decorative look. And I'm just going under one of my loops. So I'm leaving the front loop down, taking the second loop, putting that little piece of fabric or lace through it. And then you can go through and you can tighten. And that gives a different kind of a look. Like I said, it'd be very pretty with lace. I just don't have any lace handy right now. But that would be pretty with the lace. If you want to do the strips, once you have a whole bunch of strips, if you want to use that method, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your strip, fold it in half, and again, think about where you want your bump. If you want your bump on the outside, your closed end has to be facing you. So I'm going to go right under that one bar. I'm going to lift that up. My closed loop is facing me this way. My ends are here. Grab it, pull it through, and pull. Then I have a nice bump. With this particular one, using the different fabrics, I used 3 different fabrics. So I used the pattern, a blue with a little flower, and a yellow with a flower. Then for the next row, I switched it. I did yellow, then the pattern, then the blue. And I just kept switching them back and forth just to give more of a variation in my look. So I didn't have one full row of blue, one full row of yellow, one full row of the pattern. But you can do it whatever way you want. And then you would just continue. I like to do one row at a time, but for the sake of showing what the next row looks like, I'm going to go to my second row, lift it. This gets a little fiddly once you have a few of them on there. So now you can see it is under my second row. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put my fingers through, grab that end, and pull. Because it looks, you know, it's all in there and you don't really see the knots. You might see the knots on the inside one or the bottom row. If you want to be consistent, do it the same way every time. If you don't care, then it doesn't really matter. Like you can see when it's all fluffy, once it's all the way around and it would be thick, you really can't see where the knots go. But if you really want them to be the same way, then I would suggest going the same way each time. And I'm going to do one more for you. You can see, taking your closed end, putting it under and up. So now I am underneath that third row, putting my fingers through, grabbing, pulling. And then it would be the same for the last row. You would do the same thing. Now, if you want to say this is just too full, it's too much. If you want to just do 2 rows, you can do that. So I'm going to see 1, 2. So I'm going to go right down that middle. Put my fingers through and pull. I'm going to do the same thing on this side with the other 2. So 1, 2, put my fingers through and pull. So you can see that's not as full. That way, if you're doing just 2 and 2, you might have a little gap in the center. But depending on how tight you push them together, you might not see that. So if you really did not want to go on each row, and like I said, with this one, I only used the 3. So it's up to you of how full you want to make it. Now, if you don't want to have to fiddle with going through a loop and pulling your fingers through, the other easy way to do it, just put it through one of the bars and do a simple tie. Always do it in 2 so it doesn't untie on you. So 1 and 2. And then you would put your next one on. 1 and 2. And then you would just continue wherever you want. That's what this one is. So this one, you can see I just have them tied. That's what the back of the wreath looks like. On both sides, you can see here, I used all 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did all the way through. With this one, I did the top row right there. Then I did the second row. And then I didn't want it to be as full, so then I just tied them. I used that as my row there. So again, how you put them on there makes it look a little bit different. But 2 easy ways to do it, either loop or tie. And then you would just continue all the way around. The other thing that you could do is if you wanted to do a wreath more like this, but still have some fringe, what you can do is I would take long strips of whatever fabric that you want. Let's use this ribbon again since it's long. I'm going to just push that off to the side. What I would do is I would like to probably put fringe on either 1 or 2 of those, but I want this part to be covered. let's tie it just on the end. So let's take, since this has 4, let's take these 3. So if I start in my back, just kind of hold that ribbon down, I'm going to cover. So I'm going to go over 3 of those bars, pull my ribbon through, or the fabric, whatever coordinating color, bring it around, poke it through, pull it through. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm overlapping. I would take a glue gun and glue that end down in the back first, so then you don't have to keep holding it. But you can see I am just overlapping, and I don't have to go all the way over. I want to go a little bit. I would say overlap a little bit like that. Poke it down through. And then what you can do is go all the way around, cover it, and I would just, again, if you're doing coordinating fabric, I would just do the full long strips. If you run out of fabric as you're going along, all you have to do, flip it over to the back, put a little dab of glue, put your end down, and then start again. So you see the idea here of covering that whole part. So if I had that all the way covered, I could then take, let's use a contrasting color. I could then take my strips. I'm going to put my strip up through. So now you can see I can have that part of it covered, still have some fringe. There would be a little bit of a gap, but if you put a bunch of these together, I think that would close that gap. And then you've got the ability to put some flowers on there. And if you make the big flowers, then you don't even see, you wouldn't have to worry about the gap. But then you'd still have the fringe effect for all of that, or what it would look like with a smaller flower with the fringe. But that would, if you're using the flowers around, that would cover that gap, or buttons, or whatever other decorations that you would want. So that's an idea to go around that way as well. So now let's go over to this wreath with the flowers to show how I did this one. I did just like I showed you with the red ribbon. I went all the way around, covered the whole wreath with the same fabric of as my flowers. I did not want a contrast. I really liked this fabric, so I just really wanted to highlight that color, and then that way, where I have spaces showing through, it blends in. If I had a contrasting color, you would definitely see that space, and that's fine too, if that's what you like. But let me show how to make, there are 3 different flowers in this wreath. There is a rolled strip flower, which is a flat flower. And then this flower and this flower, the 2 little ones and the bigger ones, these are done the same way. It's just this is almost 3 inches. This is almost 2 inches. So let me show how to make those. This, you will need a glue gun for this. So I have taken my cardboard, I drew a circle. This one happened to be the bottom of a glass, so I set the glass down, cut around it, and then cut it, and that gave me my template of the size that I wanted. And as you can see, for the big flowers, almost 3 inches, a little less, but almost 3 inches. And then for the little one, the same thing, almost 2. So you get your size that you want your base of your flower to be. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fabric, lay it out here, and again with this one it doesn't matter for the grain at all. You're just cutting circles. The easiest way to do this is to fold your fabric up so you can cut multiple circles at a time, depending on how thick your fabric is. If you have very thick fabric, then you're probably not going to want to do that. But this is cotton, and this works really, really well. So let's do, I think I'm going to do, let's do a big flower, so it'll be easier for you to see. I'm going to set that on my material, and I'm going to just fold it over just so I can get my size, and I know that's still going to fit. So for this particular flower, you need either 8 or 9 petals. So this will be 1, 2. I'm just going to fold this over again. This will give me 3. I want to be even. 4. 5. And then I'll fold it over. Let's go 6, just so it's not so thick. All right, so I've folded that over a few times. And you don't have to do it this way. You could literally just put this on and trace around it each and every time. I just don't want to cut that often. So I'm going to flatten and smooth that out. This particular fabric wasn't even, as you can see, so I'm going to make sure I come down here. A trick, I'm using the back of a box of a cereal. This is slippery. This is a little more rough, so put your non-decorated surface down. It helps hold it in place. So now I'm just going to take a pen, trace around my circle. And there we go. And again, the only reason why I went in so far was because this material had been cut previously. So I'm just going to cut so I can save as much as I can. So I've got all of those layers in there. I'm going to hold it tight. I'm actually going to just cut just so I don't have to worry about holding so many layers together and it's slipping, so we'll use that for something else. So there are all of my layers. Now I'm just going to hold it around where I'm cutting, just making sure the fabric doesn't move. If you do not cut evenly, it really doesn't matter with this one because, again, this is Shabby Chic farmhouse style. If the petals are a little different sizes, it's okay. No one is really going to be looking at it that closely to say, ooh, they're not exactly the same. So now you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 petals. I need 9 or 8, depending on what you want. Go with the edge that I just cut, which is up here. I'm going to just, so we don't have so much fabric all over the place. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fold it, pull that out just to make sure that I'm reaching. So this would be 7, 8, and we'll fold that again. And that will be 9. This fabric is so thin that I probably could have cut all 9 out at once. But I wanted to show you how to refold if you had to. All right. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing again. Just going to cut some of that excess off. And if you're not cutting exactly on your lines and your lines are showing, it really doesn't matter. You can make sure you do it on the draw it on the inside other end of your fabric. But the way that we're layering these, you're not really going to see it. Or just draw it and then cut a little bit on the inside of your line. But I really don't worry about it showing. All right. So we had 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I have my 9 circles. This is going to be the exact same way if you were to do the smaller size as well. So it goes the same way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my scraps. That's why I say don't throw anything out. I'm going to take one of these scraps and I'm going to cut kind of a smallish square. This is going to be the back of my flower. No one is going to see this. You could use a piece of cardboard. You could use another piece of fabric. You could use a piece of felt. It doesn't really matter. Especially when you're making these flowers, they make cute pins. So if you really wanted it to be a pin, do a nice piece of fabric underneath it so you can attach a pin backing on it. But I'm just going to use this as a scrap. So protect your surface. You can see I like to protect my surface, especially when I'm gluing. I use Dollar Tree placemats. These are fabulous. I like to use black so you can see on camera a little bit better. And I never worry about taking the sticker all the way off because it's just going to get all gooky anyway. But for this, I like to use a silicone mat to glue on because then I can just peel everything right off. So I'm going to have all of my circles up here and I'm going to take my piece of fabric with my glue gun and I'm just going to put a glob of glue. I'm going to take one of my circles, fold it in half, fold it in half. Doesn't matter if you go left to right or right to left, but fold it in half and in half. So you can see that again. I folded it in half. So it's like a half moon. Now I'm going to take that, fold it in half again. So I'm going to have 2 kind of open ends and a closed end. I'm going to set that right down in the middle, hanging out. And it will want to flop open. That's okay. You can try to hold it down with one if you want. Doesn't really matter. But I'm going to hold mine kind of with my pinky. I'm going to fold it in half and in half. See, folded edge, open edge. I'm going to put my 2 open edges together. So when I go to put this next one down, this is my open edge. I'm going to put that right next to it. So now you can see I have 2 open edges. I'm going to need to put some more glue. Use the tip if your glue starts to get cold. What you can do is use the tip of your glue gun so you're not wasting so much glue. You can remelt it. I'm going to put just a little bit more there. So now I'm going to take my next, fold it in half, fold it in half. Now I'm going to do the opposite. This is my closed edge. I'm going to take the closed edge and butt those two close together. In half, in half. This is a closed edge. This is a closed edge. This is an open. This is an open. So I'm going to put my two open edges. If you mix it up, it is not a problem. But I have found if you put your open edges together on each side, when you go to poof your flower, it makes it much poofier. So now you can see on the square that I have two open edges together and two open edges together, and the closed edges are in the middle. Now I'm going to turn it a little bit. You will do the same thing. Fold it in half, fold it in half, but I don't want to glue right on top of those because you're not going to get a full flower effect. You're going to go in the middle of those two. So instead of gluing it right on top, I'm going to take it and I'm going to glue in the middle. Put some glue. Glue that right in the middle of those other ones. I'm going to do the same thing again. In half, in half. So now, this is an open edge. So I'm going to make sure that my open edges go together. Stick it right in there. So now I have two open edges. Fold it in half. Fold it in half, and I'm going to do the opposite now. This is my closed edge, so I'm going to keep my closed edges together. I'm going to put a little bit more glue. Right next to each other there. If you are worried about burning your fingers, you can always take the back of your pen or pencil or a chopstick to push that down. Fold it in half, fold it in half. I have an open end here, so I want to make my open ends together. Put that right in the middle, push it all down. So now you can see we have a flower. I like the white on the inside of this kind of tie-dye material. It really makes it look pretty. And you can fluff it up. Now you could stop right there. I know we have one circle left. This is where you decide, do you want to use it or do you not want to use it? And then I think it's very pretty with either buttons or, beads for the center of your flower, depending on the size that you want it to be. So now I could stop right there, put that in there, and that's a look. I like it to be a little more fuller. So what I do for this last one, I just want to show you this one. This one I had a little close to the edge, and you can see it's a little flatter instead of the full round. You're never going to see it. So if you cut yours out and you have some flat edges, don't worry about it. If they're a little too flat, just take your scissors and round it a bit. Because again, it doesn't have to be a perfect circle because we're folding it and we want it to be fluffy. So instead of folding it in half and in half, I'm going to kind of do it in thirds. So I'm going to fold it to the middle, kind of fold it over here, hold it, come to my flower, put a big, good drop of glue right in the middle there. I'm going to put this folded edge right in the center, and then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to go into my other petals and kind of push and squish it in there. This protects my fingers because I'm going through the other petals, and you can really see the difference of how curling that one in the middle gives me a really nice fluffy flower. Now you could leave it like that and not put any decoration in it. You can still fold that over and put a tiny little button in the center. You can also stack your buttons. If you have a big one and you want to add another decorative one in the center like that, that works too. I'm going to put just this little one in here. So you put a little dab of glue in that center of the one that you just did. Decide what side you want it to go on. I'm going to do that side. And drop it in there. And then you can squish again. Squish it around. And then you can see how pretty of a flower that makes. Really easy to do. And it's very pretty. And like I said, the same is done with the small circles. You do it the exact same way. And then this shows what it looks like on the wreath. And you can put them on any way you want. I chose to do little symmetrical and asymmetrical at the same time. I did 2 flat flowers, big ones, and then 3 little ones together and another big flat one at the end. But you can see that's how that goes. To make the flat flower, take your piece of scrap fabric again. I'm going to use this one. All right, for the flat flower, I'm going to take my strip of fabric. It doesn't really matter how long your piece of fabric is, however much fabric and how long your strips are depends on how many times you're going to go around. I'm going to cut in probably about an inch. I'm going to pull it down. So now I have just a strip of fabric. One long strip. So I'm going to take my base, my junk piece base, and put some glue all around on it. I'm going to take my strip. I'm just going to twist it to get it going. Tap that down in the center. Now with this particular method, you're going to need to use a lot more glue. So I've got that. I just want to get that established on to my piece. So now I'm going to do a lot of twisting and turning. So now that my fabric is glued to the base, I'm going to twist it. I'm just twisting my fabric, wrap it around your finger, just making like a rope. So you're going to take your glue. I'm going to add some more glue there. Twist it up again because it came undone. Just folding it on, getting it going. I'm going to basically be just twisting and coiling in a circle. With this particular method, I like seeing the white side because you can see how the mix between the patterned and the non-patterned side look. I like that look. So I'm going to twist it and then just make sure sometimes my white side is showing and then sometimes the right side is showing. So I've got it twisted in a coil. Put a little bit more glue. Lay it down. Now you can see that I used just a tiny piece of base fabric. You could use a piece of fabric as big as the flower that you want it to be and then just keep gluing on the base. I found I didn't really need that because what I'm going to do is now I'm going to just start gluing to the side of my coil and going up against that. Because see, right here, you can see I don't have any more base. Well, I don't need to worry about that. Just keep twisting. Because now you need a lot of hands with this one. You need more fingers than what you probably have. So I'm going to hold it with my thumb. I'm going to hold the coil that I just made so it doesn't uncoil. I'm going to put a little bit of the glue along the side of that coil and then just push it up against there. It's also a good idea if you have, I like to use these silicone fingers that you can put on. These are really nice because then you really don't have to worry about burning your fingers. You can really hold it wherever you want. They sell those at the Dollar Tree. A little awkward to work with sometimes. Now here I want to have some white showing, so I'm just going to kind of twist it the opposite way just to make sure I've got some white showing. And I like the bumps that it makes. So like I said, it's really kind of fiddly. You just really want to just twist it, move it, coil it for a bit, hold it, put some glue down on the sides. I have a little bit of base left, so I can put it there, and I can also put it to the side. I'm going to push it up against it. Again, if you don't have a silicone finger, you can use a chopstick or a pencil if you want to help hold it down. And again, this is where the Shabby Chic and the Farmhouse, they call it Farmhouse now, but back in my day it was Shabby Chic in the 80s. I'm just going to twist a little bit more of that. Thin layer just along the edge. Just push it right up against. The nice thing with this too is if you get glue clumps, I'm going to show you how to get rid of those. But for now, we're not going to worry about those. We're just going to worry about gluing it down. So we're just going to keep. These also make, if you have a lot of leftover fabric, these are also pretty as gift toppers, or add it to a gift bag, little pins, brooches. See, and the nice thing about working on the silicone mat is if the glue goes down, it's right on the mat. Look at how easily that comes up. These are nice. Or if you don't have the silicone mat, works the same on the plastic placemat. So just keep twisting. So this one is a lot of twist and glue right along the edge of that flower. Pushing up against it. Getting it on there. Now this is looking a little too white, so now it's time to undo some of these twists and make sure that now I'm twisting and getting my pink fabric showing. What you can do is just kind of tuck it like that and then twist, and then that keeps tucking that together, and then you can twist. And now you can see all my pink is showing. This one's slower. You can see how fast we made that other one. This is a little bit slower because you really have to be careful so you're not burning yourself. I'm going to just twist this up fast. I'm not going to care now which way it's going, just for sake of the camera. I'm just going to get it all twisted in a nice coil. And now I'm just going to glue all around my edge. We're getting close to our end. Keep it twisted. And when we get to the bottom here, we have just a little bit of fabric left. We're going to flip it over, put some glue on the bottom, and glue that fabric down. And that will hold your fabric together. And now you can see it's a little messy because it has a tendency to, the glue likes to stick out. And depending on your fabric, you can really, sometimes it really shows. You can just kind of scrape off some of the excess so it doesn't show as much. And then what you can do is you can take the clean tip of your glue gun, and if you just kind of go over back and forth with just the tip, you're not squeezing glue out, you can remelt that glue. Another fun thing to do too is remelt it and then add glitter. But you can see how this takes away some of the really big clumps. You know, and that's, you know, take the time to really sit there, melt some of that in. Or be very careful as you're going about making these, and then you don't have to take the step. I was hurrying, trying to do it. But you can melt it, and you can then go back in, pick some of that out. So that way you can clean them all up if you kind of went messy. And then what you can do with this also is take a pretty button, put a button down in the center, but that makes a different kind of a flower, a flat based flower. And again, remember with buttons, you can stack them if you want. Like if you have the shank type of button and a flat button, these are pretty to stack together. I would use a smaller one, but you get the idea. So once you have all your flowers finished, then you can just glue them right onto your wreath. Just glue them all around in whatever pattern, whatever shapes that you want. So to make a hanger for this one, I took a circle, a scrap fabric from the circles that I cut out, and glued it on the back. So I just took from my long lines of circles, I just picked one of those out, cut it off, folded it around And then I'd probably trim it here and here, just to kind of make it look halfway decent there. And then I would glue that right on there like that. And then that would give me a hanger. If you wanted that to look a little more neat, you could even then take another piece of your scrap fabrics. That's why I say keep a cup or something to put all your scraps in. You never know when you're going to need a piece of scrap fabric. So you could just cut a straight line off of that. Once you have that glued on there, you could then glue that on top to finish it off a little more nicely. For this wreath, I just put one of my strips on like I had done for all of that. Had the bump there, had there, and then with the open end, I just tied it to make a knot. And then that way, that is now my hanger. So that's an easy way to be able to put hangers on. So there's a couple different ways on how to make a pretty wreath. Hang it on your door, hang it on your walls somewhere. Just really pretty, fun, nice way to welcome spring that hopefully is eventually coming. We've had a long winter here in New York, so it's nice to hopefully see some nice weather coming soon. So this is a little bit of spring, especially with this one. So I hope you had fun. Thanks for joining me. Again, this is Kimberly Canale, Crafting with Kimberly. See you next time.